I'm Sean O'Neill and welcome to my weekly podcast where I chat to the key figures who shape and lead their industries. Today my guest is Dennis Taylor.
I turned pro, there was only 16 professionals in the world. You took a risk, didn't you? I mean, what made you decide then just to pack in the game?
I have to calculate everything. If I'm not going to be in the top 16 within the next few years, then I'm not going to have enough money.
And there's one letter in from a fellow from Liverpool. He said, I think it's fantastic how you can switch hands and play like that, Dennis. He says, you know, I'd give my left arm to be ambidextrous.
You've been rolling since the minute you walked in before I arrived.
Oh, there we go.
Well,
I have come out with some strange stuff.
Some of the best stuff is when you don't know what's happening.
But where you started playing back home? Where did you play back home?
I played in the Q Club in Newry.
Are we in Newry? That's Pat Jennings' part of the world.
Yes.
Big Pat,
Pat
yeah.
was one of the...
Because Pat used to, for Spurs, my best friend, or one of my best friends, Mike England, the footballer that played for Blackburn and Spurs, used to room with Pat Jennings.
Well, Pat Jennings was born on the same road as my dad's family.
You started playing in Newry?
I was in the Q Club, and I think whether I had a skill or I just fell into it, my dad owned a pub. So I was hustling on the pool table from the age of 7, 8, 9. And at the weekends, my mum used to love to go out. So in them days, I could get into the pub and I was just hustling all night at the pool table. Little did I know, they're the skills. You're learning how to hold your own against people that are, older, superior, against the crowd late at night. And I remember when I went to the Q Club for my first junior competition, I just felt like as if I owned the place already. Because I was in environments that were at that time, when you think, would have probably terrified people. So going in among people my age, it ended up being quite fun and relaxing.
So you were making a few quid then at...
I made more money at the weekends hustling than I did if my parents gave me pocket money for a month.
See, I never did get well, I suppose I hustled in one respect, but there was only one fella because I knew I was going to beat him. He used to come up from the pub and go into Jim Joe Gervin's club. Yep. And I thought, well, this will be a half a crown or whatever it was. It'll keep me going in games for a while. I used to beat him all the time. But he did beat me. He did beat me one day, and I hadn't got any money to pay him. Oh, that was embarrassing. I'll never forget, because I did the most silliest thing because I panicked and I went into the toilet. Now the front door is next to the toilet door, right? I've gone into the toilet and I was in such a state because I had no money to pay for the table or him, and I was in such a state. I got out through the little window in the toilet. Now, that's the panic I was in. I could have just walked out the front door, but I wanted him to see me going in the toilet. And anyway, that taught me a lesson. Yeah, to always have a few. If you're going to play for money, make sure you've got it. But that's where I started playing in Gervin's club. Did you ever get up to Gervin's?
I ended up being the Northern Ireland under-19 champion in Gervin's in Coalisland. Yeah.
Well, the club you played at before that, there used to be the police station opposite that club, but there was the original Jim Joe's club. We called it Jim Joe's. That was his name, Jim Joe Gervin. 2 tables in it, and I was only 8 or 9 years of age, walking up Platers Hill in Coalisland, and the door was open. And that's the first time I ever seen a snooker table with the green cloth and the balls. And I thought, God, it just fascinated me. And I knew my brother went in there, and there was no alcohol or anything, but it didn't open till 6 o'clock. And I said to my brother, can you ask him if I would be allowed to sit and watch them playing? And because I was a good little boy, they let me sit holding the rest for them. They sat on there and I handed them the rest. And then they let me stand on it was like a lemonade box that I kept under the table. So that was how I took my first shot, standing on a lemonade box. And that's how I started playing snooker.
Did you actually think you were any good?
Well, at the beginning, you have no idea how it's going to go. But then I got playing more. And at the age of 14, I was the best at billiards, because back in those days, you wouldn't have played much billiards.
I was taught, my snooker coach, Patsy, used to ask me to do at least a half an hour or an hour billiards a week to understand the angles.
Yeah, well, we played billiards and snooker, and at 14 I was the best in Coalisland, in the area around. But we never played. We had an A team that used to win the local league, but I think the highest break was 60. Nobody had ever seen a break above 60, but they were all steady, good players. And I didn't realise until I moved to England just how good we were. But my highest break was 60, and I moved to England when I was 17.
Do you think that was because of the weight of the balls, or because I remember playing a game of snooker in a club in Armagh, and there were ivory balls. They were as heavy. You just couldn't screw back. You just had to follow through. I think they would have been good for billiards.
Yeah, that's what they were, but they had to be turned every so often because they went out of shape, the old ivory balls. Yeah, imagine, you wouldn't get ivory snooker balls nowadays. But that was it, and it was a fluke how I went to England, because I worked in the local pipe works, and they made they used to try and had to make so many pipes in a shift. And they used to try and make them quick, and then they'd play cards for the rest of the shift, and they made a faulty batch, some of them. So the foreman, the manager came in, sacked the whole squad, 6 of us. And then he come back to see my mum a week later and said, well, listen, it wasn't Dennis's fault, you can have his job back. And I'd made my mind up to go over to stay with my aunt in England and look for a job there. And only for that happening, I might still have been living in Coalisland. So that was my first time in England when I was 17. And then I realised I was pretty good at snooker and made a 100 break within being in Blackburn within 3 months because I was playing better players.
But was there an awareness that at that stage you were close to being as good as anyone else, or was the people out there you thought, wow, if I
No, there was better, but that's what I did when I moved to Blackburn. I'll play with someone that was a little bit better than myself, and then you know, when you beat him, you just kept playing better players. But of course then, when my first competition was the billiards, the British Junior Billiards Championship, 1960, was it 60, 68? And that's when they brought me back to Coalisland to do an exhibition, back to Gervin's club. And they got the All-Ireland Amateur Snooker Champion to come along to play the exhibition against me. And Jackie Bates, who was a billiards player from Belfast. But the All-Ireland Amateur Snooker Champion who turned up at Gervin's club was Alex Higgins. And that was the first time I met Alex. We were both 18. And I thought, this fella's a bit special, the way he plays. I'd never seen anybody run around the table like that. He was a bit of a pain in the neck even back then, because he was talking away while Jackie Bates was playing at the table. I said, Alex, you can't be talking while he's doing his show. But that was the first time I met Alex. And then he came over to Blackburn, where I was based.
So was there a reason that you didn't go to them competitions just purely because you'd moved to England? Had you not got a thought, I'd like to be Irish amateur champion?
Well, no, you were living in England, so I was playing in the English Championship, and there was I don't think there wasn't, going back, Jackie Ray was just known as the Irish champion because there was no other players really around. So we didn't get the Irish Championship
got to the final
going.
straight away.
Yeah, he used to play a round robin with himself. So that was the introduction to Alex, who moved to Blackburn, and I spent probably 18 months practicing with Alex, and the 2 local businessmen took Alex under their wing, managed him, and sorted them out, got his teeth and all fixed, and got him nice clothes to wear, and he won the World Championship in 1972. And I used to do quite well against him in practice. And I remember thinking, if Alex has won the World Championship, I might be able to turn professional. So that was one of the reasons I turned professional. And John Spencer, you'll remember John, was 3 times a world champion. He lived in Ratcliffe, and then he finished up having a club in Bolton. But John proposed me to turn professional, because at one stage you had to win the English Amateur Championship before they would consider you to be a professional. But I hadn't won the English, but I'd won, a few other titles and that. But John proposed me, and I was accepted into the professional ranks. And when I turned pro, there was only 16 professionals in the world, and that was 1972, just after Alex won the World Championship.
How was the prize money then?
I don't think there was much prize money.
Could it pay for your living expenses, or did you also have to work?
Well, you had to work. I mean, I was still working. I was my big moment in snooker was taking a big risk. Listen, as you do in all walks of life or any businesses, the people that get to the top are the ones that take the risks. And in 1974, I was managing a snooker club, had 2 children, had £200 in the bank, and I paid my own way to go to Canada to play in the Canadian Open Championship and packed the job up at the snooker. So that was a huge risk, and I got to the final, beat Alex in the semi. I'll never forget, in the semi-final, I said to Alex, if you go on and win it, you give me £100. If I go on and win it, I'll give you £100. You know, because it was
took the pressure off.
Yeah. Because I couldn't even afford to stay in a hotel. I stayed with the promoter in his house, and Alex wouldn't agree to this. He says, "No, babe, I've got to pay for my girlfriend." You know, he used to talk a bit funny. I've got to pay for my girlfriend coming over. So that was it. So I played him in the semi-final. Never forget it. He made 127 break. And he was, you know, all round the table flashy. The next frame, I made 128 break against him, and I beat him in the semi-final. I lost to my good friend and still my best buddy, Cliff Thorburn. But I got to the final, and because I'd done so well there, one other thing that got me invited in, I got invited into Pop Black, because that was the big, huge it was for me. But one of the things that helped me not only get into the final against the Montreal champion in a little exhibition, I scored 349 without missing. And how that was, I cleared up in the first frame, and then 130, I can't remember but I had to break off in the second frame, and I fluked a red. Cleared the table again, and he broke off, and I made another century. So it was 349 without missing. And I got a lot of publicity for that and getting to the final. And Ted Lowe got me, you know, the voice of snooker, the commentator that was there in Pop Black. He got me an invite to Pop Black in 1974 and 75. I got to the final.
So Pop Black was going alongside most of your career then? Because in the timeline of Pop, I know it goes back a few years. I was born in 81, but I wasn't sure that, so you were like mini celebrities while having a career on the side nearly.
Well, only became many celebrities when Pop Black started.
Yeah.
Up until that, nobody.
And what year was that?
It started in 69. And the 3 things that did a tremendous amount for snooker.
When I say mini celebrities, probably that's understating.
Once Pop Black got popular, Pop Black did an awful lot for the game. John Spencer and Ray Reardon turned professional. They did a lot, but Alex probably did even more. Alex Higgins did even more than John Spencer and Ray Reardon because of the way he played the game. Yeah. And once I got onto Pop Black, even though I didn't win it, I got 2 finals. All of a sudden, you could get exhibition work at clubs because they'd seen you on television. You know, but and then they moved the following year, 1975. Eddie Charlton took the World Championship to Australia, and you had to pay your own way to go and play in the World Championship. And I went to the local brewery and I said, I've got to go to Australia. Any chance you could do some shows, and the money will go towards my trip to Australia. And they agreed to do 10 shows for the Lion Brewery in Blackburn at the time. They changed the name then to Matthew Brown, but it was Lion Brewery, and I did the 10 shows, and I got 20 quid a night, and that 200 quid went towards the airfare to go to Australia. And I carried on doing shows. I was still doing some shows for them, and I won the World Championship because they were so loyal to me. But I got to the semi-final in Australia. Never forget it, because it was played in different provinces around Australia. And Alex was playing Ray Reardon, I think, in Melbourne, and I had to go and play Eddie Charlton in the semi-final in Brisbane. And listen, back then, in 1975, you could have had 2 Irish players in the final of the World Championship. But unfortunately, Alex and myself both lost. But that was a great experience, going to Australia for the first time.
Was there anyone managing you back then?
There was a few different. The one fella that came into the game. There was a few, but Dale Simmons was the first one that brought proper money into the game. He was a partner of Sean Connery. They had a business together in London, and he ran the game for a good few years, Dale Simmons. And he was the one that said, listen, especially Reardon and Spencer, you boys are going out doing exhibitions for 75 quid a night. You're on TV every week, you know, on BBC television every week. He said, it's silly. So he put their fee up to £500, and they got it, which was great for us, because if they could get 500, then our fees went up. So gradually, people said, would you not rather have been at the top now? Now, the way I did it and the time I did it, there was no money in the game, and I've seen it grow and grow and grow, and I wouldn't have had it any different.
I have a feeling that you guys obviously put in the effort, but had maybe a different type of pressure than now. There seems to be so much pressure in life for people to have to perform at their best, have to watch the diet, have to watch the sleep, have to say the right thing, which is probably one of the hardest things to do. And then, you know, I find the younger people that are coming through have so much of like a conscious that if they don't do their best, they feel like they've let the world down, not just themselves.
Yeah, well, they're under so much pressure. There's more chances nowadays. You know, the standard is unbelievable. You know, back 30, 40 years ago, there was maybe half a dozen really good players. The rest were average.
But you had a lot less competition.
Well, yeah, I mean, I always felt sorry for, I don't know whether you remember, he commentated as well. In fact, he was commentating on my final against Steve Davis in ¡85. A player from Baker, Jim Meadowcroft.
Yes.
Well, Jim used to practice with Alex and me, and Jim was a brilliant player, but he kept drawing Ray Reardon in the World Championship, and he nearly beat him, you know, once. So that was the only tournament you had. You had only a couple of tournaments to go at to make your name, and Jim was a great player, great commentator, but he never quite made it because he bumped into Ray Reardon. So the chances are there nowadays, but you've got to produce the goods and to earn a really good living, you've got to get into the top 10 or certainly the top 20.
I always say there's part of the challenge is making the money, but the biggest challenge is able to keep it and use that money.
That's another ball game. I mean, the money in the game. I mean, Luca Brecel winning the World Championship was what a fantastic player, but a bit of a shock because he wasn't practicing. I don't think he expected to win it, and then all of a sudden I remember presenting with the Young Personality of the Year over in Belgium. I went over to do a live show, and they had 2 snooker tables there, and we both had to try and clear the balls up to see who could do it the quickest. Well, I was never going to beat Luca. He was so fast and so fluent. And I knew this fella was going to be something special. And it took him a while to come through, but what a talent. Although he hasn't, you know, since winning the World Championship, he hasn't quite performed, but he certainly enjoyed himself with the amount of money that he won. So
I find that if I look back on my career and who I thought would excel, although we say we knew that player could do it, there's a handful of other ones that I think, you know, it's unfair because they were so good, but they just didn't get through. I'll not name them on here but there were some players that I know had an ability that I could beat them on a good day, but if I was to play them 10 times, I know they're going to win 7 or 8 of it. And somehow they just vanished. They were world amateur champions, world junior champions. They thought, you know, the projection was going to be, you know, off the charts. They looked like record-breaking players. So I sort of think, you know, they're the people that I think to myself, my God, I thank my lucky stars.
So you made the right decision.
Well, I don't know if it was right or not.
I mean, you took a risk, didn't you? I mean, what made you decide then just to pack in the game? Which works in my favour sometimes and not on others, I have to calculate everything. I'm completely sort of numbers driven and statistics driven. And I thought that if I am going to be, you said you have to be in the top 10 in the world, and I thought that if I'm not going to be in the top 16 within the next few years, then I'm not going to be able to do it. And I thought that if I'm not going to be in the top 16 within the next few years, then I'm not going to be able to do it. And I thought that if I'm not going to be in the top 16 within the next few years, then I'm not going to be able to do it. And I thought that if I'm not going to be in the top 16 within the next few years, then I'm not going to be able to do it. And I thought that if I'm not going to be in the top 16 within the next few years, then I'm not going to be able to do it. And I thought that if I'm not going to be in the top 16 within the next few years, then I'm not going to be able to do it. And I thought that if I'm not going to be in the top 16 within the next few years, then I'm not going to be able to do it. And I thought that if I'm not going to be in the top 16 within the next few years, then I'm not going to be able to do it. And I thought that if I'm not going to be in the top 16 within the next few years, then I'm not going to be able to do it. And I thought that if I'm not going to be in the top 16 within
and stay there for so many years, then I'm not going to have enough money. I'm going to have this like face of fame. People's going to know me, but my pockets are going to be empty. And I thought that would be even worse than my pockets empty and nobody know me. So I did a quick calculation and I figured out that Stephen Hendry or Ronnie O'Sullivan, who at the time you could say were going to be, or arguably the two best players in the world, or they're going to be the two players who are going to make the most money, are going to end up topping out at about 6 to 10 million pounds worth of wealth, and they're people. They're two of a kind.
Oh, yeah.
So I thought, well, if I'm half as good as them, I'm going to come in with about 2 to 3 million pounds. Then that 2 or 3 million pounds is going to be spaced over 10, 15, 20 years. I realised that actually I'm going to end up making maybe 100 grand a year, giving my life to something at best. So I calculated, I remember drawing it out, and I thought, right, I put unbelievable pressure on myself to try and hit these targets, but at the same time, I don't know if it's a blessing or a curse, I moved to Liverpool. You introduced me to Don McPherson. I said, I need a mind coach for this, so I just moved to Liverpool. And at the exact same week, I moved into an apartment block and I met these property developers. And a quick look around me, and I just figured out these guys are worth X times more than Ronnie or Stephen, or the numbers just, I couldn't get my head around it. I've met people that could have that amount of wealth. And then, but they took me under their wing and they sponsored me the first year at snooker. But the more they sponsored me, the more they wanted to spend time with me, and we got on well. And I remember the day I went for a practice session to Blackburn, and it was 2 each, and we were playing a money game, and I got a phone call. Hello, Sean. We're going to have dinner in a few hours. What are you up to? And I said, nothing. Yeah, where is it? Yeah, okay. And I thought, I want to spend time with these guys. And at that moment, the unreal expectations for me to get to the top, but wanting to spend my time with people that I could get knowledge from, that took me under their wing, that just completely, I got fixated about the fact that if there is a life after sport, that's my direction. Whether, I don't know, but I knew then, before I quit that year, I give myself expectations that if I met it, it would be amazing. But if I didn't, I have to choose another path.
Very few players would have thought that way. I mean, that's just the mentality that you had, and obviously you made the right decision. I think other players would just keep playing until they wouldn't even contemplate what they were going to earn or what they weren't going to earn.
But and you just touched on it before. If you're going to be successful, you just have to commit or take that risk. Yeah. I handed the sponsorship back. I had little or no money in my bank account, and I had no career, and I had no job, and I didn't know what to do. And I remember the day I rang my dad, and I didn't realise the emotional impact and what it had on him. It was years later when we just talked about it. He said, it put him in a really strange place because he was worried about me. How could Sean quit his career? Mm-hmm. Why would Sean quit his career? Because I couldn't give a reason. I couldn't say I'm on the path because I'm getting this. I'm actually just doing nothing.
How old were you then?
I was 23.
Wow. Yeah.
And it's for another day, but it was a really difficult first year. It was a time that I wouldn't wish on anyone to go through, because I had to dig deep to tell myself that I'd made the right decision, although there was little or no prospect of what I was going to do. But because I had no choice, and my only choice now was to gain knowledge from these people, research, read, connect, I got a phone call then, and my first break. Your first break always comes when you least expect it, and ironically, the ex-owner of the Q Club rang me Tony, and he was always a great supporter of mine, and Tony helped me out in the early days and helped me with free practice. And he says, I heard you quit your career. He said, yeah. I said, yes. And he said, why in hell would you do that? And I said, I'm a property investor. Because I was so embarrassed to say what I, and at that time I had purchased the apartment I'd moved into to rent on a 90% mortgage, and I had paid a deposit on another apartment. And then that was coming 2004, 2005, and things were starting to go, the property prices. And he says, oh yeah, he says, well, if you've quit your game for property, he says, I want to know, he says, just sold my snooker club, £1 million. He says, I don't know what to do with it. I had someone who trusted me. I had the other guys looking after me. I all of a sudden had a product. I had people with money, and I put them together. Right. And that was my first deal. And when that deal happened, it was like that light bulb moment. I just need to repeat that deal. That was months and months of earnings from playing snooker through a phone call. Right. Yeah. Anyway, and it snowballed. What happened in the next couple of years, I could write a book on its own.
Yeah, well, there you go. You had to take that risk. You decided, yeah. And it's everybody in life, no matter what they do. If they don't take the risk, people will just carry on and they'll work for 40 years in the factory, retire and get a watch or whatever it is, and that's it. And a lot of people are quite happy to do that, but you've got to take the risk. And
to be fair, I admire that, because some people do sacrifice. There is an element of selfishness, if that's the right word. Okay, I like to do my best for people, but I do have to look after myself or do what I need to do first. And but I do admire people that just stick at it and grind. I just think, how can they just grind the 40 years past? But they do it for their family, they do it for their parents, they do it for all the right reasons.
Yeah, I can go back to that that Jim Joe Gervin's first club. And they used to show snooker, believe it or not, way before Pop Black on Grandstand. If the horse racing was rained off, they had a certain amount of snooker that they recorded. In fact, I finished up staying with the fella in Bristol. He was a chemist, and he had a snooker room. And that's where Joe Davis and Fred Davis and John Pullman and Rex Williams, they went and recorded just little matches in his room, and it was filmed. The BBC would film it. And I would sit in Gervin's club looking at a little tiny black and white set, seeing these people play snooker. I said, they're playing on television. And then Jackie Ray, who was the Irish champion and great character, great exhibition player, one of the best ever. And then suddenly you see somebody that's Irish on the television. Couldn't believe it. And then I did get to play Jackie. He came and did an exhibition at Gervin's club when I was only 14. And what a thrill that was to see somebody that you'd seen on a little black and white television. So, snooker was on TV back in the 60s with the great Joe Davis and Fred Davis. I mean, Joe Davis was 20 years undefeated champion. And his brother Fred, who was an excellent player, 10 times world champion. But there were two brothers, but they were like chalk and cheese. Joe was quite arrogant. Fred was the loveliest. When I played him my first Pop Black, I'll never forget it to this day. I've got a beautiful photograph of, I've probably got it on my phone, of Fred Davis. But I played in Pop Black, went down to the dressing room, and he just finished his match, and I was going in, and I opened the door outside the dressing room there, and it was Fred Davis, first time I met him. And he stood there with his cue and his waistcoat on, and he spent about 10 minutes chatting to me, and I thought, well, what a nice man this is. Although he was ruthless on the table because I did play him. But what a lovely gentleman. Do you know, he qualified at the Crucible Theatre. He got to the semi-final when he was 64 years of age. Because I remember that song, When I'm 64, the Beatles number, they played that one. And then he qualified to play at the Crucible when he was 70 years of age. I mean, that is incredible.
Do them stats not count now whenever they're saying about who won the most World Championships? And
I know, you know, sometimes we mention these, and you know, especially if a game in the commentary box of a game, not a lot's happening, and some people love to hear this here. But then I've heard some of the young, I won't mention any name, the modern, you know, what are they talking about old players like that in the commentary box for? You only do it if there's a lull in the match, and it might add a little bit to it. There's a lot of people that forget about nostalgia, and a lot of the modern players don't realise in the early days when we used to go to Australia, we did a Pop Black version out in Australia. Eddie Charlton and Ted Lowe used to come, and we used to go around and meet all these business people and have lunch with them with Ted Lowe, and this was all promoting snooker. And a lot of them don't realise that some of the older players spent an awful lot of time promoting the game and helped to get the game to where it is today.
I've spent a lot of time with younger people, helping them with career progression, mentorship, life after their career already, because in these days you could be in your mid-20s like me and your career's finished. And I always go back to growing up on the farm, the values I learned. I wouldn't be here without the older people, without all these stories, without all these are the stories and memories is what actually keeps me on track, and to appreciate that without the older generation of whatever field you're in, they paved the way for you, for us, or even the next generation below me to be there. But we talked about some amazing names there. Have you got a top 3, top 5 people that you think are there, not just maybe Ronnie always comes to the name, but maybe people that have such an impact on the game that you have to, not just skill level, but a huge impact that you think were
I think yeah, we talked about Alex and John Spencer and Ray Reardon doing a lot for the game, but I think Steve Davis became a brilliant ambassador for the game. People said he was boring and interesting, but he came on the scene and changed the game really, because he put multiple hours of practice in. We used to practice, but you didn't practice the way they do the modern player. But Steve was the first one to maybe play 5-6 hours a day. And Barry Hearn took him under his wing. He bought out the Lucania snooker clubs at the time. They're all temperance clubs. And then he got the Matchroom club going, and Steve and Barry became close friends. And Steve used to play. All the top players were brought down to Romford to play against Steve. And you'd have 200 or 300 people in, and he was beating everybody because he was that good. So Steve had a big impact on the game of snooker and raised the standards, because you had to start putting the hours in just to be able to compete to him, because he dominated the game throughout the 80s. So you would have to say that has been a big influence on the game. He's a lot of fun. I do a lot of shows with Steve now. We do the Black Ball final, and John Virgo comes with us in the theatres.
Every time I've been speaking to you, you've been on the road doing another show.
No, the show, we love them. Steve loves it as well, and we have to chat about that. In the first half of the show, we'll play a couple of frames and then set the black up and talk about it, and I get to win every night on the black. No, but he's very, very funny, Steve. But I used to say in front of him, I said, yeah, God, you were so boring back in the 80s. I said, I remember when you used to take a Valium as a stimulant. but he does make fun of himself. But he said, yeah, it was David Vine's fault. He said, I'd be winning at snooker. He'd come out with a microphone and ask me questions about snooker, and I would answer him on snooker. And people say, see, he just talks about snooker all the time. But he is a lot of fun nowadays, and he probably paved the way. And then, of course, Stephen Hendry came on after Steve and dominated the game throughout the 90s. For two players to dominate, as you know, you played the game, to dominate for 10 years is exceptional. So they both had a big impact on the game. Lots of players did, but them two in particular. And then, of course, Ronnie came along. But you always need the characters, and you had your Alex Higgins, and then Jimmy White came along. Jimmy, 6 times he lost in the final of the World Championship. He's won everything else, but couldn't. If Stephen Hendry hadn't been around, he'd have been twice at least world champion. So he came along then. He was another, and then of course Ronnie. Ronnie's the one. People say, well, no, Steve. Some people think Stephen Hendry's better than Ronnie. I mean, I think even Stephen admits that Ronnie's. Well, you watch him. He's a genius on the table. So.
My dad doesn't like to change his mind, and for the best part of 25, 30 years, he's maintained that Steve Davis was the best, and in recent years, he just had to admit that Ronnie is. I keep saying, Dad, when are you going to change your mind? It's been going on for a decade. Dad, when are you going to change your mind? And then eventually he's realised, like, there really is no argument.
The things he's done, I remember he got a bit of stick. Well, he didn't get a bit of stick. It was Alain Robidoux, the Canadian, lovely fella. Ronnie switched hands and potted the last colours, and Alain thought he was taking the mickey out of him. But what people hadn't realised before he'd ever switched hands on television, I remember playing an exhibition with Ronnie. 137 clearance he made. Every shot was played with his left hand, you know, on the cushion, wherever it was. So he was brilliant with his left hand, but he'd never do it on television. Yeah. And then suddenly he switched, and isn't it amazing the number of players that are good now at switching hands? There was only Fred Davis and myself, and I changed hands because I hated the rest. I could only play certain shots left-handed, not the way he could play. And you know, funny enough, you've spent an awful lot of time in Liverpool. I remember when we used to get the fan mail at the Crucible, because you were there for 17 days, and there was one letter in from a fellow from Liverpool. He said, I think it's fantastic how you can switch hands and play like that, Dennis. He says, you know, I'd give my left arm to be ambidextrous. Now, it would have to be somebody from Liverpool that came out with that. What a classic that was. I never forgot that letter I got from him, yeah. But yeah, and so there, and Ronnie also, he's beaten all Stephen Hendry's records with the exception of world titles, and I think it's just a matter of time, because he will win his 8th. Will he stick at it till he gets it?
Oh,
yeah.
He because you don't know.
He's retiring every other week.
Yeah.
When Steve David talks, Ronnie comes in the studio and he said, well, Ronnie, I didn't play very well. I think I'm going to retire. You know, he said, and I'm sitting there, and then next tournament he makes a maximum break and comes in and says, I think I'm going to retire. So Ronnie won't retire for quite a few years. I think he can be winning world championships in his 50s. Because what is he now? He'll be coming up to 40, 49 next birthday, I think. He is. And that maximum break in 5 minutes and 20 seconds, I commentated on that. In fact, they've rounded it down to 5 minutes and 8 seconds because they've now said it's from he first struck the ball. So I don't think that'll ever be beaten.
I remember sitting at home watching that.
God. The only player that could possibly beat that is Tep Chow Anu. You know, the Thai player. He is left-hander. He has made maximums in 6-7 minutes, but I can't see it happening in the World Championship. Tep Chow Anu.
So someone like, and I don't know the answer to this, is like James Watana. He just vanished. He was somebody who was...
James was the first from that neck of the woods.
Thailand, yeah.
And I hadn't realised...
Everyone speculated that Asia's going to take over the sport.
Yeah, Thailand was... There was nobody in China at the time.
Yeah, Thailand was...
It was, yeah, because I remember he made an early maximum break in his career, and I'd forgotten it. I think it was the British Open, and I commentated on it. Was it the World Match Play, I think? What a talent he was, James Watana, and he started the game opened it up out in Asia, and then Steve and me, when we won that, when we played that '85 final, we were playing in Hong Kong, and we went to Canton, which is now Guangzhou, on the train to give an exhibition.
The final.
This is when we were out playing, and we were the first snooker players into mainland China, and about 15 of the press travelled with us on the train. I've still got the ticket that was on that train. It was a soft seat. There was just benches in these trains. And going into China, nobody played. They played it even in the streets, but nobody was any good. We played a couple of players, and I think the highest break was 20. and they liked the game of snooker. And I couldn't believe it when I went back 30 years later to China. The difference was incredible. I mean, I think we seen about a dozen cars. It was all bicycles. I mean, I remember waiting to go across Tiananmen Square. Barry Hearn, he came with one of the great lines. We had to wait for about 10 minutes while all thousands of bicycles went past. And Barry said, "Isn't it amazing that someone from China has never won the Tour de France?" Why would he think of saying that? But to go back and see how China had developed, and look at the players now that's coming out of China. Another 10 years, the top 16 players in the world, I wouldn't be surprised if at least 10 of them are not from China.
I remember hearing that when I was playing, but I do agree it's going that way.
Well, they're playing it in schools out there. They're becoming so good at such an early age, and they copy everything they see on television, and they're very, 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 very talented. But
a lot of Chinese people wear glasses. They could
listen, I should have.
They could overtake your views as being the most watched snooker player with glasses.
I'm trying to get a thing going in China. Endorse a pair of glasses that make the balls smaller and the pockets bigger. See, that would go well if you could make a pair of those, wouldn't it?
We touched on it there, but I know it's a question that you have been asked thousands of times, but the 1985 final I was 4 years of age, and your name's stuck in my head from that day till to now. And the guy from the village, the town, that ends up standing there with one ball to pot that could just basically, and has done, change the whole trajectory of your life. Just talk us through that, because it's not an experience that many people get a chance. And how did you even hold your nerve?
You know, it's 40 years next year, and we're going to be doing quite a few shows just celebrating the 40th anniversary. I can't believe it's 40 years ago, and people remember that more than any other. There's been some brilliant finals, but it's the one that sticks in people's memory. I suppose the fact that Steve was dominating the game then, and most players were beaten before they got their cue out of the case. But I'd done well against Steve in the Crucible, because in 1979, when he turned professional, and he was beating all the players, as we touched on down in Romford, Barry Hearn thought Steve Davis would be world champion in his first year. And that was 1979. I'll never forget, I beat him 13-11 and knocked him out that year. I'd had a decent record against him. I played him 4 times. I think he beat me the year before. People forget, I played him in the semi-final in 1984, and he beat me then. So I think we're 2 each. We've played 4 times at the Crucible. But I was looking forward to playing him in the final, because I'd come through to the Crucible about 4 months before I won the Grand Prix, when I was going to pack snooker in. That was when my mum, I was playing up in Newcastle in the Jameson, which was one of the big major tournaments, playing the best snooker in my career. And I got the devastating news that Mum, who's only 62, had a heart attack, passed away. I couldn't believe it, because she was slim. I didn't think there was anything wrong. And I just wanted to pack the game up. I went back home. I remember all the family, sisters and my brothers there, were saying, "Well, listen, go back and play in the Grand Prix for your mum." And that's what I did. And I won the Grand Prix. That tournament, I beat Neil Foles. He was world number 3. I beat him 9-2 in the semi-final, and I beat my best friend Cliff Thorburn. I think he was world number 1 at the time. I beat him 10-2 in the final. So really, that was me playing the way you'd do in practice. I brought it onto the table. I wasn't worried about missing. And I carried that over to the World Championship. And I got through to the final. I was hoping Steve would have got beaten the other semi-final, because he's so tough to beat. But I had a session to spare in the quarter-final, and I think a session to spare in the semi-final to get through. So I was really looking forward to playing Steve. And of course, we played 7 frames in the first session. There's 4 sessions over the 2 days. And I sat in the seat for the whole of the first session. He never looked like missing. He 7-0. I was just sitting there, wanted the Crucible floor to open up and take me away. And come out in the evening, and he did the same in the first frame, 8-0. And he used to walk around the table quite stiffly, Steve. You know, he's about 6'2", Steve, and he used to dominate the Crucible theatre. And I'm thinking, there he is, look at that. But I wasn't doing anything wrong. I wasn't missing anything. But the thing that used to get a lot of the players now, when Steve used to go back to his seat, he used to pick the glass of water up and he'd go sip. And I remember he used to think, Steve, why don't you have a drink of that water? You're sipping of that. I'd worked out in 25 years he hadn't drank half a pint of water. But he did play unbelievably well, but he made one little error. Took a bit of a risky green on and it wobbled in the jaws, and I won my first frame, cleared up to win. Even though he won the next, I was 9-1 behind. But I did in the evening what he did to me in the afternoon. I kept him in his seat, and I won the last 6 frames, most of them with a frame-winning break. I played really well, so I was only 2 behind going in to the final day, and I could not get ahead of him. Every time I got level, he'd pull 2 or 3 ahead. And this is when BBC started cancelling all the programmes to stay with the snooker. Yeah. You've got this ginger magician playing a fella with a big pair of upside-down glasses that people thought were a gimmick, but I needed them but just for my eyesight because I had pretty poor eyesight. And it seemed to fascinate everybody. And then it kept going and going. And I remember David Vine, when it was 17:15, they got the presentation party ready behind the commentary boxes to come down those stairs, and they used to have a big giant cheque to present, and they'd got a marker plate ready to write Steve Davis's name on the cheque. And they had to go back to the sponsors lounge because I won the next 2 frames to level it at 17 each. And then that last frame. Did
you know this at the time? Or
No. This is stories you hear afterwards. Yeah. No, you don't know it at the time. And the last frame starts, and we didn't realise there was nearly 19 million people staying up because it went to after
I was midnight. One of them.
You shouldn't have been allowed up.
I wasn't allowed, but
there's some wonderful stories about people that were in bed. But I'll maybe talk about that after. But anyway, so 17 each, and we start the last frame at 11:10. And now the safety was unbelievable, but the pressure on both of us, we were missing pots that we wouldn't normally miss, and that went on, and it got to the last 4 colours which I needed. And Steve, under pressure, Steve used to get a bit whiter, and when I was under pressure, I'd get a bit pinker, and then a nice bright red. So I was getting redder, he was getting whiter. But the last 4 shots, probably I'd made my mind up, just go for anything. Don't lose this final after fighting your way back. Don't lose it by trying a safety shot. And I've knocked the brown down into the left corner pocket, which we call it the yellow pocket. One of the best shots under pressure I've ever played. Then a tricky blue and a dodgy little pink that I rolled in. But I left the white in a position that I could back double. The black was about 12 inches from the middle pocket. Back double it. And for some reason, and I don't know to this day, as I walked round, the trophy was sitting there, and I kissed the little lady on the top of the lid. Why, I don't know. I think it must have been, I'm going to win you with this shot, or I'm going to lose you with this shot. That's probably what I was thinking.
You get to touch the trophy.
You know, and I back doubled it, and the crowd started cheering, and they thought it was in, and I missed it by a fraction, but the black went safe. I was lucky. And he played an unbelievable safety shot, and the black doubled it up and down the spots, which they used to do back in those days. Then nowadays, if you got a black ball fight, they just send it onto the side cushion. And he played the perfect safety shot. And I baffled Steve with my next shot because I tried to double it from the bottom cushion into the top pocket. I mean, crazy. And if I get the white reasonably safe, I've got a chance of the 2 corners to pot it in. Missed both corners, but the black went past the middle pocket and was safe. And Steve messed up then. He tried to send the black around the angles onto the ball cushion behind the brown spot, and he double kissed the white and left me the first real chance. And I'll never forget it. I got down to the shot. I had to pot the black down past the blue spot and the green spot, and I'm up near the corner pocket. I think, keep your head still, push the cue in and out 4 or 5 times, through in a straight line, and you're world champion. 13 years I'd been trying to win it. Well, when I watched it afterwards, talking about keeping your head still, I jumped that much off the cue and pushing the cue through, and I nearly knocked an old lady out in the front row with my elbow. I missed that black by so much, I nearly fluked it in the pocket I was leaning over, and then when I seen it not going in, I walked back to my seat and I thought, that's it, I've blown it. And when it turned round, the black wasn't over the pocket. It was a shot that Steve had to cut back in. And when we do these shows in the theatres, we always set that black up. And it wasn't as easy as it looked at the time. And Steve, these are Steve's words, he didn't talk about it for a good few years. He said,
I'm not surprised.
As he got out of his seat to walk across the Crucible, he said his legs had gone. They felt like somebody else's legs. And his arms, he said, they felt like somebody else's arms. And he said to cut the black in, and you'll know this.
Was he worried about the white going in the...
Well, not only that, but the big thing is a shot like that under pressure, you hit it thick. You're always going to hit it thick for some reason. And his brain saying, don't hit it thick. And he didn't, he hit it too thin. He overcut it. But the white could have possibly went in off, but somehow the white kept coming around the table. If it had stopped in the middle of the table, near the blue spot, and I had to get the rest out, oh God, what a shot that. I would never have potted it with the rest. I was useless with the rest. But I could get my hand on the table, and I took ages on that last shot. I didn't even grip the cue. I let the butt of the cue rest on 4 fingers, kept my thumb out of the way because I snatched at the previous shot, and just let go of the cue, and fortunately that little black disappeared into that corner pocket, and well, that was all your ambitions all realised just with that one shot, and the whole place erupted, and I stamped the cue, and what did I do? Yeah,
cue over your head.
Cue over
everybody
head,
knows that stance.
Do you know, everybody, the things that people do when they see it, and you never get fed up of it. If they've got a pair of glasses on, they'll turn them upside down and they'll wag their finger. But one of the funniest stories was I was picking my son up. He was teaching. He's a golf professional. He was teaching in Singapore, and I'm at Manchester Airport at 5 in the morning to pick him up, half asleep, leaning on the car. And this fella had put his family in the car, and he's got to be 60 yards away. But he shouts my name out, and I thought, oh, what's this here? So I've looked over. He's only got his glasses upside down, raising an imaginary cue above his head and wagging his finger at me. And I thought, well, if you can do that at 5 in the morning, that'll do for me. So people do them, and even to this day, they still do it. So, but when we talk about that final, and Steve in particular, he's won 6, but he says he'll remember that more than the 61, because we were involved in a bit of snooker history that people, as you say, you were 4 at the time.
I was 4 years of age.
Gee whiz, yeah. But the stories I was saying about what you did to watch it, the number of people that were at school and had a little black and white television up in their bedroom, and there's a few, the same story, they said they were watching it and they heard their dad coming up, so they switched the television off and pretended they were sleeping, and then the next morning the dad said, oh, you missed a great final, I come up to get you down to watch it on the big colour TV. But now there's some lovely stories. Gloria Honeyford, from Northern. Yeah. Gloria was hiding behind the settee every time I was playing a shot. She couldn't watch me take a shot at the black. The great Gloria Honeyford, yeah. So there are lots of stories, and as I said, people still talking about it.
Was there ever a moment after you thought, or did it haunt you, what if not?
Never did.
No.
It's never ever come into my head. They did do a bit at one of the World Championships with Dougie Donnelly, and they had, it was a bit of a Mickey take, but they had Steve knocking the black in, and he was raising the cue above his head. But I never thought about what would it have been like if I had lost that.
And a testament to Steve, really, because okay, you can say he won so many, but at the same time, it must have took him a bit of time to get over that one.
Well, I mean, the interview after, I mean, he tried to be funny, but he was so white. And David Vine, probably everybody was caught up in the moment, and David Vine, one of the best presenters ever, just happened to say to Steve, "Can you believe what happened there?" And Steve tried to be funny. He said, "Well, yeah, you've seen it in black and white," and it didn't work. You know, it wasn't funny. It was just the wrong question to ask Steve. So, no, it took a while for him to get over that.
So when I quit my snooker career, I had Eddie with me. Eddie was an elderly man who followed me to every game from the minute I had moved to Liverpool. And I nicknamed him my Scouse granddad. So when I had finished the last game, we went for a pint and I handed him the cue. And he loved snooker and he played all his life in one of the working man's clubs after his bus journey each day. He used to drive the buses. And we cried. He couldn't believe that I actually was going to follow through with this, quitting my career. And years later, he passed away, and now the cue's back in my possession.
Oh, you got it back, yeah, that's good.
And it's sitting there, and who knows where it's going to go, but that cue will stay in my possession or someone very close to me forever. Have you still got your cue from that 1985 final?
I still have it. In fact, I tried to use half of it. It was a wood-to-wood joint cue that I got that was made, and it's a brilliant cue. I've still got the cue, but as I say, the top end of it, I remember that was the story as well. It was underneath the snooker table when we lived in Blackburn, and we had a little Westie dog who happened to get into the snooker room, and I got the cue on it. It chewed the end, so I had to have it tapered down, but it got a bit too thin to play with. So I still have that cue in, and the glasses. I've kept the glasses. Somebody offered me an awful lot of money for them, but that's something you're never going to let anybody have. Maybe if there was a museum or something in Ireland or whatever, you'd let go into that. But now I've got them in with the trophies. But as I say, I took half the butt end out and put another top in it, but I just couldn't get on with it because I still do a bit of playing. So now it's back in the glass case.
You actually use it?
I did actually use the cue, yeah, but now it's...
Is it not better to keep it?
I won't use it again.
Yeah.
It's there.
Safe.
The glasses are there. I've got to take the glasses because I brought them over to Ireland. I was doing a live chat show, and I wanted to see the snooker specs, so I got them out and was showing them, and the lens flew out and right across the studio floor. We're lucky to find it, so that lens still needs putting in proper, but I've got the... Jack Carnham made those glasses. Jack Carnham was a commentator with the BBC, a professional player as well, more of a billiards champion than a snooker champion, and a great commentator. He commentated on Cliff Thorburn, the first ever maximum break made at the Crucible, and his great commentary line when Cliff was down in the black, he just said, "Good luck, mate." And I thought that was a great bit of commentary to make the first maximum break. So I went and stayed with Jack Carnham. He lived in Bracknell, and his family business as a young man was making spectacle frames. And he said, "I haven't made any glasses for 30, 40 years. I said, "Jack, you made the ones," because he had a pair like the ones he made for me, but he never appeared on TV. I said, "I want you to make a pair like that, Jack." Because some of the old players used little swiveled lenses, but you had to keep swiveling them. But he made a pair that were fixed and didn't move. And I stayed 2 days with him and watched him make these by hand. And without Jack Carnham making those upside down glasses, I might never have won the World Championship that year. So a lot of it was down to the upside down glasses, because I'd got pretty poor eyesight. Nearly won the World Championship in 1979, the year I mentioned I beat Steve Davis. Wouldn't have had the same impact, would it? But I had a pair of contact lens, because I used to take my glasses off to play. I had pretty poor eyesight, but played with poor eyesight, because you couldn't play with your normal glasses. But the contact lens that I got were fantastic, but I could only keep them in for 3 or 4 hours, and then I couldn't get on with them with the astigmatisms I had. but I nearly won the World Championship. I beat Ray Reardon, Steve Davis that year. Terry Griffiths, I led 15-13. Terry beat me in the final day. So I nearly won it with the contact lens. So I knew then I had to get the glasses. And bless him, it was Jack Carnham that made the ones that I won the world title with.
Do you remember what you said to me last week? I'll be delighted to come on your podcast. Hopefully when I die, you'll be famous. So it'll be the same with your glasses and your cue.
Yeah, well, I mean, they became a gimmick. People thought of it, but they were just purely to see through, because the first time Eddie Charlton seen them, he said, bloody hell, he said, he looks like the front end of a Ford Cortina. That was Eddie, or Joe 90. Yeah, other people said that, Joe 90.
So a lot of what I do now is try to, through stories, educate, advise and help people on their way. And with the ups, there is usually downs, whether it's life, career, money, and just your if you have an emotional roller coaster, there is usually a down. After 1985, or even after that night of that famous night where 19 million people watched you, did you struggle to come back to a level, or where did it go from there?
It was just the reaction of everybody. I never had time to sort of, normally when you win a tournament, you'll have a lull after it. I never had a chance, because everything just erupted. And then, of course, Barry Hearn. I'd got an opportunity to go with, I think it was IMG at the time. And Barry Hearn then, he wanted to sign me up as well. And because Steve and Terry Griffiths and Tony Mayer were with Barry Hearn, I decided to go with Barry. Whether that was the right decision or not, maybe if I had went with IMG, who knows. But anyway, I went with Barry and had 5 years with him. But I was so busy. I remember, God rest his soul, when I used to go over to play in Ireland, Eugene Crozier. Did you ever meet Eugene?
I know the name.
He used to bring all the players over, and all the top players, and he was from Draperstown, was Eugene. And we were heading down to Cork after it, because they did a book, and Eugene featured in the book the autobiography. But the things that you were doing, and sometimes you think, I'm not going to be able to fit all this in. We're going down to Cork, and he says, oh, by the way, I was looking forward to having an hour's sleep before I played the exhibition. Oh, we've got to go and visit this, and I'm having a go at Eugene. And then he turned around and he said, it's your effing fault for potting that black. and then we burst out laughing, So yeah, I was so busy for the next 18 months, couple of years, enjoying it, especially the first year. You didn't have time.
This was true exhibitions.
Yeah, and you didn't have a lull, because, listen, everywhere you went, there's the best feeling about winning a world championship. Everywhere you go, when somebody introduces you and they say those words, would you please welcome, the reigning world snooker champion. I mean, you never get a chance to have a lull. But
did your performance go down in any tournaments afterwards?
No, funny enough, I started playing better. I had a great run from 85 through to for 2.5 years. I won tournaments all over the world. I won the Canadian Masters twice. Unbelievable win against Steve Davis the first time. In fact, I was, once again, I think I was 4-0 down, and I come back and beat him 9-5. I made three centuries and 4 frames against him, and then the following year I beat Jimmy White in the final of that. Won the Australian Masters. I think I won 19 tournaments between roughly in that 2 or 3 year period, and then it sort of eased off, and then it was then starting to get hard work. But I had a great 2 or 3 years after winning that World Championship. So yeah, but as you say, I had no problem coping with the downs, because you went back home and you'd got a family to go to. It would have been different if you hadn't, if you had been on your own or whatever, but when you've got a family there, you're soon back down to earth, and you've got you don't have time to have any lows.
Did that help you cope with losing your mum? Because it seemed, you know.
Yeah. I mean, without family, without a doubt, we were a very close family, and that that helped. And I tell you, that kept my dad going for another good 15, nearly 20 years.
Imagine.
You know, because.
And your dad's still back in Coalisland?
Well, he passed away. He was 84, 85. So he had a good run, and I don't think he'd have got over losing my mum, but because I finished up winning that World Championship.
He had plenty to talk about in the town.
Yeah, he had. They come over in '79. In fact, I think my mum was frightened to death because some friends of mine said, if you get to the final, we've got a small aircraft, we'll send them over for your parents. And they did. My sister and my parents come over on this small plane to watch me in the final in 1979. And I lost in the final. But my mum didn't get to see me be world champion, but my dad certainly did, and he lived, and people were calling at the house in Coalisland for years after visiting him, you know, and he would chat to everybody about it. He loved it, yeah.
Your family and parents and the people that love you the most are sometimes the most protective of you. Did your transition from work to snooker go at an ease that all of a sudden you became this professional snooker player making money? Because I know my parents were terrified that I would quit school, that I took the chance of trying to be a snooker player. They were, you know, was worried about my career, my future, my education, all of these things, which is understandable looking back. But as a kid, I thought, leave me alone. This is what I'm going to do.
Yeah, well, when I moved over to England, I was only 17, and I wouldn't have stayed in England. I had a few friends, close friends, that went to Manchester and were in digs. I would have been homesick. I'd have been back home straight away. But because I went to live with my aunt, I had 4 aunts near Blackburn, Darwin, just next door to Blackburn. And I lived with my aunts, so it was like home from home. I suppose they were supportive, but my aunt Sheila, you know, she was the main one that we stayed with her, and her husband Bill, who was the loveliest Englishman, well, a lot of lovely Englishmen, but he was an absolute gem. And everybody came over and stayed with him. And I remember saying I was working, my older brother was with us, and I was working 12-hour shifts in a paper mill when I first went over to England to earn a bit of money, 7 days a week, 6 in the morning to 6 at night, and then swapped around the following week. And I'd come home you'd be up at 5 in the morning, so you'd work from 6 to 6, and then I'd have a quick bit of tea, and my brother and me would get on the bus outside the house. It was a terraced house they lived in, and go to Blackburn to practice. I mean, and my aunt, she used to say to me, I don't know what you're doing with that snooker. She said, you're exhausted, you're working. She said, like, I wouldn't mind if you were gonna make something out of it. And we often laugh and joke about that, and we did afterwards, because I was quite, at that age when I moved to England, I was very, very shy. You know, I couldn't...
Hasn't changed, has it?
They could not believe that I finished up on television telling stories and jokes and playing snooker and doing trick shots. It's amazing how it all... But that was all experience. Moving to England, it just opened up a whole new world, and you had to learn, especially with playing snooker. It's a bit like some of the young golfers. My 2 sons are heavily into golf, and you'll see at a golf club, if a youngster wins a tournament, he's got to make a speech, Mr. Captain and Mr. President. And I had to do the same thing. I remember the first exhibition, I had it on a little note, Mr. Chairman, Mr. President, thanks for inviting me along to your club. And you learn these little things, and it took a lot. But it's amazing how my whole thing turned around, and to going from very, very shy at 17 to finish up telling jokes on television. Never in my wildest dreams would have thought that would have happened.
People don't believe that I was shy as well.
Well, there you go, you see.
I took a public speaking course because I was so terrified of public speaking. And I remember hearing that the public speaking and stand-up comedy is feared more than death. So I thought, if I can conquer both of these, I'm going to be ahead of the game. So I did a public speaking course first, thinking that it would prepare me for stand-up comedy. And not far from here in Liverpool, I did a 4-week crash course. And after the 4 weeks, I had to stand up in front of 250 people and do a stand-up gig. And I remember there was a moment that I had almost, I was maybe like Steve Davis. My legs went, my arms went, and I thought, I'm not going to be able to pull this off. But you know, you push through these things, you take chances, and the rewards you get out of it.
Experience is the whole thing, and I, as I say, was the first player to tell an actual stand-up joke while I was doing the trick shots. But I used to use a story at the holiday camps, because I would do 7 holiday camps between Monday. This is before I won the World Championship. And you would go round, and if you're playing at 10 o'clock in the morning, 2 frames and trick shots, you did. And I used to use, I thought, well, if they've seen a comedian the night before and they're there at 10 o'clock in the morning in a snooker club in Pontins, it was, if you tell them a joke when you're doing the trick shot, if they laugh at that joke at 10 o'clock in the morning, you can use that joke anywhere. And that was my
What's the joke?
philosophy. That was it. You just, you picked a joke, and I mean, God, the first joke I ever told at an exhibition, I'll never forget it. I said, what was it? The fellow he said he went to the doctor, he said, I keep losing my memory. And the doctor said, how long's this been going on? And the fellow said, how long has what been going on? You know, it's the stupidest. But it was a joke that just got you into it, and then you build up, and you know what people will laugh at. And even to this day, I mean, some of my best friends were Irish comedians, Frank Carson, Jimmy Cricket, Roy Walker. I mean, I used to love listening to those fellas. I mean, those days are gone with the old comedians, but it was still very, very funny at the time, you know.
No, it's
if it's funny, it's
I look
funny.
I look back, and I guess it's going full circle. I think things are like a pendulum, aren't they? They can go extreme one way or the other way, and I always think that.
Oh, I'm coming to Liverpool to play exhibitions. I mean, I used to love that as well, because they'd finish up telling you jokes. You know, so you would always pick something up there, you know. And I mean, the sense of humour is. I do some Scouse gags when I'm playing with John Parrott, and I give him a great line, and he uses it and brings the house down. Because if I've done 3 or 4 Scouse gags, then John Parrott will say, Dennis, by the way, he said, what's black and blue and floats in the Mersey? I said, I don't know, John. He said, an Irishman that tells Scouse jokes. And always brings the house down. But the nice week, Scouse guy said, I played with, because Stan Boardman, Stan and me, very close. We played golf together, an awful lot of golf together. He's a remarkable competitor on the golf course, but he's so funny to play with. But we do the shows about it. Played the course in Liverpool with, I think Stan said he's an honorary member at Royal Toxteth. He said he played a team competition there. He said, and the first prize was an alibi for 4. You know? And it's just funny. I mean, Liverpool's sense of humour is unbelievable. Yeah.
You have had obviously a huge impact on so many people. Your sense of humour just lightens things. You have a huge amount of wisdom that maybe I've taken on board. So many things you've told me, whether you probably even remember what you've told me or not. There's so many, but a huge part of my life is to guide people, show people there is a way forward. Maybe I won't have the answers for everybody, but at least be able to send them on their path. And can we just maybe, if for the people coming through, whether it's in snooker sport, whether it's in any other career, is there like the top 5 things? Is there some guidance and advice you could say to the younger people coming through? That one of my things is that I ask, when people sit down with me and tell me they want to be successful, I say, well, have you got 2 decades in you? Like you've mentioned before there about having a 12-hour-a-day shift, then to go and use the rest of the time, whatever time you've got left. And that's the bit that made you who you are today. Not the 12-hour shift kept you living. The other bit give you who you are? Is there
there's
tips
no
or-
easy way to get to be successful other than hard work. You've got to work at it. It just doesn't happen, and you're learning all the time. And as you did, you know, your experiences, and you meet people, and you learn from those people, and you study what they did and how they became successful. And you do get bits of advice along the way. I remember chatting to the great Joe Davis at Pop Black. We were sitting, we were watching the monitor or something, and I'm trying to pick his brains. I mean, this is a man that was undefeated 20 years. Okay, only played one challenge match a year, but still nobody could beat him. And he said, whether it would apply to other games, but I suppose it would, or in life in general, but he said you play the percentages, excuse me, and it still applies this day to a stop when you watch snooker players, and you can see if the percentages are against them missing the shot. If the percentages are in your favour, have a go at it. And you can see they're taking risks. They do take more risks now, but I still think playing the percentages are the people that have the most success. So that was a great bit of advice from Joe Davis. But another great amateur player, Mario Burney from South Wales, he was a wonderful orator. And I used to love listening to him, and he'd be chatting and people and just that lovely Welsh accent. But he said something to me once, and it still applies today, really. He said, you know where you'll improve a great deal? If you learn to beat your own ego. Now that sounds strange, but straight away, as soon as he said it, I remembered when I first played in Pop Black, and instead of playing to win, you wanted to play a shot for the people watching. You think, oh, I'll pull off this spectacular shot, and you'd go and if you miss it, you're handing it to your opponent. And it's a great piece of advice. Learn to beat your own ego. It's a wonderful bit of advice, that, because a lot of people do take that risk, that it's just beyond, back to the percentages again. You maybe get 3 out of 10. If it's 7 out of 10, then take it on, you know. So other bits of advice, just learn off other people. Absorb as much as you can off, and pick their brains all the time. And I'm sure you've done that throughout your career as well, or certainly in the early part of your career. It's a great way of learning or watching, you know. This is why these Chinese players coming through, they've watched Stephen Hendry and Ronnie O'Sullivan playing, and they absorb everything that they're watching, and it helps them to become as successful as they are doing.
Yeah, I found that when my grandma passed away, there was so much knowledge lost. Wisdom passed down through words, but there was an element of so much had been lost. And soon after that, I started journaling. And the best way I found is, although I wrote notes down, I used to email myself one-liners, a quick story, and I'd put it in my archive. I wouldn't try and do loads in one day. And over a long period of time now, I have encaptured all my living memories.
Right, yeah.
But I also have them date and time that I said it or thought it and who I was with. And that's now created the material for, as I move forward with my books. I've got children's books about the farm. I've got lots of books that will be released over the coming years, say maybe sooner. And I found that the best way is that learning, we're in a place now where there's so much information fired at us within one day. So it's hard to embrace, but I found if you don't capture that moment, you won't maybe understand at that moment what you're capturing, but you will start looking at the things you're capturing starts to tell a story, and that story of where that you're capturing will form your future. And along that way, if you are able to capture the wisdom and advice, and that means that you must appreciate the person that's in front of you. You must be there, you must be digesting it, and I found that I've always, I don't know, sometimes you may saw me on my phone, but I'm making sure I better not miss what Dennis just told me. And it's become well known now. You know, the jokes are with the people that know me very well. Oh, Sean's on his phone, but he's not texting or emailing anyone else. He's making notes on what's going on here. And that for me has found the best way to capture. So I don't want to lose any lessons in my life now. And that will form the basis of, hopefully will give me the guide for the future as well.
What a great bit of advice that is in itself. Emailing yourself all little things that the only time I've ever really done that, and I did it for my wife really. I went.
You emailed me an invoice last week.
Oh yeah, and don't forget them. But I was on the Real Marigold Hotel, which was a fantastic BBC documentary where 8 of us went off to India to see what it would be like to retire there.
Yeah.
My wife said to me, just make a note of what because you can watch the series back again, but she said, just make a note of what happens. And I've never ever done that before, but I've got all the notes of what happened on the first day we went off here. And you don't get that when you watch the series back again. So a great bit of advice there. I wish I had done that a lot more, because if you're going to write a book, it's all there, isn't it? But yeah, that series, just going back to that the reason I loved it so much was they finished up taking me to where the game of snooker originated.
Was there a snooker table there?
There was. It was in India, and I knew it was 1875 that a Neville Chamberlain invented the game in Uttamundi, in the Uti Club. It's a hill station, 6,000 feet up. It's in, I'm trying to think of the province it's in, but Uttamundi, people don't know where it is. And there's a population of about 70,000. And they've got the club there where the game originated. It's quite an exclusive club. They've got Indian members from all around the world. And we met the secretary, who looked like a 60s pop star the way he was dressed, a lovely man called, was it Stephen he was called? Oh. And Paul Nicholas was with me. They were just good friends, a huge star on television back in the 80s with Paul. And we arrived at this club, and they weren't going to allow, they were going to allow me in to play on the table, but they weren't going to allow the BBC to film. The old president said no, they're not. But anyway, they agreed to let us go in and film. And it was fascinating because the room was as it was in 1875. But obviously the table was recovered and everything. But that is where the first game of snooker, and the rules were written to play snooker, and I got to play on that table. And it was quite emotional to be, in a room where they invented snooker. It was just incredible. And I was, the rest of the 4 weeks in India was fantastic, but that was the icing on the cake to get to where the game originated and play on the actual table. The cues, they had a cue that was over 100 years old, and it was nearly taller than me. And I used that cue. I wanted just to use it. But yeah.
So you've gone back 100, okay, my miles are correct, 170 years then from it was thought, and now you're at the modern game, and there's talk for inclusivity and pundits, and where do you stand with all of that?
Well, you see, the commentary, people thought I started commentating when I retired. I was thrown in at the deep end at the UK Championship one year. Someone had taken ill, and they said, would you like to have a go at the commentary? We need somebody in there. I said, I'll have a go. And who did they put me next to? Ted Lowe, the voice of snooker. He'll always be the voice of snooker for me, whispering Ted Lowe. I'm sitting next to him. And that was my introduction into the commentary box. And it always fascinated me. And I've always sort of, even back in the early stages, I've always tried to sit there in the commentary box and commentate as if you were sitting in somebody's lounge with them, sitting on the settee with them and telling them what's happening. And back in the early days, we didn't have much to say. You sat there and the producer would come on, just let the boys play, and Ted and you'd sit back in your chair and watch the game, and then you'd pick the microphone up. But now it's like all sports. They want.
It's like a bit of the
talking.
It's like the changing of the guard.
Yeah. And now, the thing that I don't like about, but people love it. They've got the headsets when they go into the arena because they're used to listening to the commentary at home. Now, it's not good for us because we're commentating for the people at home. So if you've got a little funny line, say there's a safety battle, you've got a little funny line you want to get on, you've got to be careful, because if the audience start laughing, and the players will think, what's going on? So you've got to be very careful. But I've always loved the commentary, and even to this day, I still love it going in there. Never ever get fed up sitting in the commentary box. And there's new players coming through, and I was the first one to have a go at the white lines when they introduced them onto the table. We're getting out of snooker, you could put the lines up, or you could put a circle up, and people seem to like that. Some people didn't like it, but I remember one woman sent a letter in, and she said, "Can you tell Dennis Taylor to stop putting those white lines up on the table? My 2-year-old daughter keeps going over and trying to wipe them off the TV screen." So and it's great to have new commentators coming through, but they were talking about, as they do with a lot of sports these days, they're letting the people that are getting a little bit older go. Now, you're sitting behind a microphone, as long as you're not talking any dribble, you're still able to commentate. And I can read the game, even these modern day and the young Chinese. I know exactly what shot they're going to play. So it's great to bring new people into the commentary box, and younger people into the commentary box, but I think the people, when we do the dinners and you mention about the commentary, and you mention people like John Virgo and myself that are still commentating, they said, well, they've got to keep you on, bring the new ones through working with you. But there's a possibility they might suddenly, But
it would be a shame for them not to experience what it's like to be with you and take on part of the humour and just obviously evolve. Like, supply and demand proves a lot, and every time I'm on the phone to you, you're in a car travelling to somewhere because people want to watch your trick shots, listen to you. You've been hired to go here, there, and everywhere. You're probably as busy now as you have been for a long time.
I love the shows. I mean, to do we call it the Black Ball final at the theatres with John Virgo with us. I mean, Steve, myself and John Virgo, we've had some unbelievable shows. And then they've got the Clash of the Titans, Stephen Hendry, Steve Davis, with me doing the trick shots and comparing. And we've even we did 3 shows with 5 of us. The Darling of Dublin, Ken Doherty, myself, John Parrott and Steve Davis. And the first half of the show, John will get people out to do a few tricks, trick shots, which is great. Then we have an Ireland versus England at snooker. And if it's one frame all, we have a black ball shootout. And who did they put in to do the black ball shootout? Steve and myself. And that's the first half of the show. And then we all sit on the stage, and the audience, we do our own little bit, and then the audience can fire questions at us. And we have had so much fun. And the people, we went to the Crucible, 1,000 people turned up. So we're hopefully going to do more of those. And listen, it keeps you young. And as I say, hopefully, there's no word that we're not going to be commentating. John Virgo and myself are still there in the commentary box. And we look forward to commentating with the younger people that they're going to bring through, hopefully. So,
is there signs that the money in snooker will continue and grow?
Well, it will. I mean, Barry Hearn was always saying he'd love to get the World Championship first prize to be £1 million. It's $500,000.
Is there a reason why not? Is there not a big hoop to have that figure?
It's getting the correct sponsorship in, I suppose. I mean, you could increase the number of people that watch it, but that would be a shame to go from the Crucible. It holds about 970 people. They've got a big tournament in the Middle East now, where the prize money's as good as the World Championship. So I think it's growing all the time, and the game's growing around the world. it's just the UK. I'm a bit concerned about the UK and the youngsters coming through. You've got to keep the facilities to bring these youngsters through, otherwise the Chinese players will overtake them by a margin. There is a few good young players coming through, but it's important at grassroots level, because there's plenty of coaches around, World Snooker coaches, to get the UK youngsters playing, to to bring new talent through. But no, the game's healthy.
Terry Griffiths had set up.
Bless him, Terry's not very well at the moment. He's got dementia, as Terry. Did a lot. He was probably the main coach.
Terry coached me for a period of time.
Terry learned his craft from Jack Callan, who was, is it not Jack? Frank. Where'd they get the name Jack from? Frank Callan, who was from Blackpool and was still coaching into his 80s. And he was the one that coached all the world champions at one stage. Terry was one of them. Then you had Steve Davis, Stephen Hendry, John Parrott. I did a little bit with Frank. And Terry carried that on and then added a little bit of the positive thinking. Terry would read up on the books on positive thinking and add that to it.
He was way ahead of his game, wasn't he, when he was compared
so
to...
I didn't realise Terry had...
I spent a bit of time with Terry. I remember it's like meeting your heroes in a way, and you and Terry were huge in the game back then, and sort of retired, but still iconic. And I went to South Wales, and I remember he picked me up in his 7 Series BMW, and I sat and I just remember feeling the leather in the seats and thinking, wow. And he took me into his match room, and the sound was different without a single table, and I just thought, I just want a piece of this.
Yeah.
Or I want to, and I remember that day like it was yesterday.
He had the great saying, didn't he, when he got... It might have been the year he beat me, actually, and he won the semi-final. And he said to David Vine, he said, "I'm in the final now, in his lovely Welsh accent.
Terry told me, Terry taught me something, and it's always years later. I didn't write this one down, but I remembered it. It was the first really positive thinking advice I was given from someone that you looked up to. And he said, no matter what day it is or no matter who you meet, he says, even if you meet someone that's going to bring you down, he said, listen to them. Tell them why. Listen to all the reasons why the weather's no good, why there's no money, how the government doesn't give them enough. And just listen and just agree. Don't argue. And he said, when you leave them, punch the fucking air and said, thank God I'm not like that. And I have repeated that hundreds of times and thought it's everything is a yes, not that was a 15 minutes wasted. I could have been at the snooker club. He said that was, he said that's time well spent. He says, because they're the people that'll give you the reasons why not. And he says, the reasons why. And you see it all now. But when you sit someone in the flesh, when you sit with someone in the flesh, and something that really hits home, and that's where every moment of the day, I sort of say that's great, even when it's not great. I just think I've experienced something to remind me why the path I'm on is the right path.
Yeah, bless him. He's as I say, he's pretty poorly at the moment, but he was when we used to go abroad, he was the one that would do the bit of coaching, and of course Terry did the commentary as well, and with that lovely Welsh accent. Just going back to the commentary again, we can't let Ted Lowe, a few of his classics. Everybody remembers the one where he said Fred Davis is snookered on the yellow. For those of you watching in black and white, the yellow is the colour directly behind the blue. That was Ted's. But his best, went out live, and dear old Fred Davis was playing, and we touched on about switching hands. There was only Fred and myself that used to switch hands back in those days. But he had an awkward shot. Fred tried to reach it with his right hand, threw his leg over the corner of the table, couldn't reach it, slipped off the table, switched hands, and Ted Lowe said, well, you know, Fred Davis is 67 years of age now. He's a little bit too old to get his leg over. Instead of leaving it, carried on and said he prefers to use his left hand instead. So you don't get them much better than that. Although who was the one come out with a lovely one? Mike Hallett. Well, you would have known Mike, who should have won the Masters. What was he? 8-1 up against Stephen Hendry and lost 9-8.
I watched that.
If he had won that Masters, who knows what he would have won.
Yeah.
But he commentated when Sky used to show snooker, and it was when the misrule, the controversial misrule, came out. And it was Steve Davis playing Stephen Hendry, and he had Stephen in all sorts of problems. And the referee foul and a miss, 4 and a miss, 7 and a miss. Mike picked the microphone up. He said, well, at the moment, he said, Steve Davis is jumping all over Stephen Hendry's misses. So, you know, when Barry Hearn signed me, God, he used to travel everywhere with us. And he never seemed to suffer from jet lag, Barry, but before he got into the boxing and that, he was always with us. And then, of course, he got us to do the Chaz and Dave, which everybody remembers.
Yeah.
I mean, we got to number 5 or number 6 in the top 20 with Snooker Loopy. We spent 2 days at the match room in Romford with Chaz and Dave. Absolutely fantastic couple of days. They were great characters, and the song, as I say, was so successful. We did a follow-up to it, and I remember performing it at the Hippodrome Theatre. We did a live thing, and we all and they did a video of it. It was called the Romford Rap, you know, and thankfully it only got to number 95 in the charts, and that was the end of the recording career. But the film for Snooker Loopy was funny, but then we go to the Hippodrome in London to record this, and we all had to have the colours of the balls, the suits. So of course Jimmy White had a white suit. I had a green suit, being Irish. Terry Griffiths, poor Terry, had to wear a pink suit. And all different colours. And what was it? Oh, Steve, of course, he wore the black suit, so he just went out in his normal gear. But to do things like that and Matchroom, we were endorsing aftershave, all sorts of things, you know, we were sponsoring. So it was a great period, a great 5 years with Barry and the Matchroom boys. And then I finished with Barry and went off to Ian Doyle and Stephen Hendry's team. He had, at the time, he had Joe Johnson, John Parrott, quite a few players. And yeah, so. But Barry Hearn back running the game again. Did a lot to get the game was sort of going nowhere. They didn't have the right people running the game, and then suddenly Barry come back in, and he'd been involved in the 80s. So the players had about 5 or 6 tournaments to play, and now they can pick and choose the tournaments all over the world.
There's a stat that 3 in 5 Premiership football players go bankrupt, and a lot of other successful sporting people do go bankrupt. Is there any investment advice or any way that you have managed to, you know, dodge that bullet and, you know, keep enough money in your pocket? Was it earnings that kept going? Did you make some right decision? Did you learn along the way? Had you the right people around you?
Well, you've got to learn along the way, and you've got to try and invest a bit of money and pensions. I mean, a lot of modern, I mean, it's different nowadays, but back then a lot of sports people just earned their money and spent their money. They tended to forget that your taxman's going to be after some of it, and then you've got to put some away for when you're going to need it in your old age pension. You know, it's amazing the number of sports people that back then that never even thought of getting involved in pension schemes and that, and didn't have the correct advice. I think it doesn't apply now to sports people nowadays. It doesn't apply. Boxers, you know, 30 years ago and that, how many boxers earned millions, and we're all skint, you know. But a few of the snooker lads, you know, they had their problems, you know, with not, you know, putting stuff away for you know, for their future. But it's all down. That's why people like yourself, to help, well, in business or anything, just to help people to not be silly with their money, because there's a great deal of people that seem to be able to squander money quite. And
I think that there's a misconception with me that I'm sensible with my money. I'm absolutely not. I have the ability to know how to make money, but how I've managed to sort of get to where I am now, I also lost it all when the recession came 2008. But
but that was a recession. You weren't wasting it, were you? Did you?
I spent a few quid as well. No, I can't just blame everybody else. I think there's a lot, but I did spend. But what's helped me is I'm surrounded by people that the checks and balances of, you know, what I do with my life, my businesses. There's good advice. There's people I can lean on, and I guess I've learned along the way. So I haven't, and it's not being modest. I haven't achieved what I've achieved by doing it on my own, which is obvious in one way, but when you do say it, there's a team of people around me, and that team, we all protect each other, and then our my partners, my advisors, my friends, my other successful people, and not just financially successful, just enjoying life. Our network of companies now manage and look after and take care of a lot of other people.
Well, you've spread it around, so another recession wouldn't necessarily cause you the problem.
I hope another recession comes when it comes to financial terms, but what I wouldn't like to see is, I don't like to see people suffer. Although I suffered, another recession, whatever way it comes, will probably benefit me financially. However, you don't wish it on other people, but if it does happen, we're well prepared to take advantage of that. But the purpose of this conversation is to for anyone out there, just to know that it's easy to say you need the right advice, but you need to take time to get to know the people. You need to take time to make the decision. You can't wait too long, but you can't act too hastily as well.
It's letting the people know that they're not, that the advice they're getting, they're not just going to pay a lot of money to someone and they're not sure whether they're going to get the correct advice. So it's explaining to people exactly what you.
Well, I would say, I think Warren Buffett has said this, and he's probably someone you should listen to. But if someone is giving you advice and they are getting rewarded heavily on fees, not heavily on the results that you're going to achieve. If they're getting rewarded heavily on the fees they're going to get, irrelevant to what's going to happen in your pocket, there's a very good chance they're not the right people for you, because it's human nature to be incentivized by the fees that you are getting.
Which they've clamped down on, really. When you think back to the 70s, 80s, pension schemes, people were putting people in pension schemes. The commissions they were getting out of it was astronomical.
But even now, and look, you can't knock it. Everyone's got their. But if you take out insurances now, the first year or two of the insurances go to the broker. But anyway, look, there's anything wrong with the individual that chooses their path. But it's one sort of red flag, if maybe say, if wherever your money is going and the person advising you is going to get huge fees from the advice. If they get huge fees because they've helped you make money, absolutely fine. That's, like everybody needs to, gain from whatever you do. And if that was the case, you'd find that it's more a shared risk reward, if that would be the best way. It's not just it's all on one side. You have to make sure that everybody wins.
Yeah. But at least people are being told what they're going to have to pay or what they're paying. So it's making sure that you get the right advisor. That's what it's all about. Yeah.
The future of snooker. How do you think it's going to be as the decades goes past? And do you think it'll ever be as big as it was?
Well, all you've got to do is look at the crowds. It was in North Wales there. packed houses at all the shows, and that's with some of the top players not being there. I think the game's healthy. People tend to make the comparison, and when we do the question and answers with all the players there, Steve Davis, myself, John Parrott, Ken Doherty and Jimmy White, they would say, well, the games, we haven't got the characters in the game that there was back in the 80s, you know, but that applies to all sports. You know, you don't have any John McEnroes coming through in tennis, or Ilie Nastasis, or Elite Trevinos in golf, but there'll always be somebody that will come through that keeps the game at the top. At the moment, it's Ronnie O'Sullivan that's keeping the game, you would have to say. People say, what happens when Ronnie goes? There'll always be somebody else will come through. The game's very healthy, really. You're never going to get the viewing figures that you had back for most sports back in the 80s, because there's so much choice now, and with social media, you're never going to get. If you get 2 or 3 million watching anything now, the figures are very, very good. But overall, you just got to look at. And Eurosport, fair play to them. They've done a terrific job around Europe with snooker. They do a tournament in Germany. Going back, the only place was you'd go and play an exhibition in Germany for the expats back in the 80s. Nowadays, they do a tournament, 2,500 people will get into a venue to watch snooker. So snooker it's one of those games, as you know, once you start watching it, you can get hooked on it. And the game is very healthy at the moment. And as long as the young players keep coming through and playing the exciting snooker that they're doing, although having said that, people don't just want to watch 100 breaks all the time. They did a survey one year, did they prefer the tactical side of the game, and it was slightly more like to see a close match with a bit of tactical play. Great to see the big breaks.
Almost misses.
Yeah, I mean, Ronnie at times, he'll go on a run there. I've seen him win a match in the Masters in under an hour, 6-0. I mean, that can happen, but people want to see. There's nothing better than sitting late night watching a game of snooker that goes down to the last few balls. That gets everybody's enthusiasm going. So it's in pretty good shape at the moment, and let's hope it continues that way.
Well, one thing I think is in good shape for the people that are outside the top 16 or even the top 32, they get match experience in front of a crowd that, if you were 32 in the world 40 years ago, you might not have got in and had that experience of crowd. So you understand how maybe the people that aren't going to get to the top of the game, they're still so close because they have that have that excitement and have the crowd behind them.
Just exactly what you said there. We always used to talk about a new player coming through to Sheffield, the Crucible nerves. These lads are playing in so many tournaments nowadays. They get through to the Crucible. It doesn't apply the way it used to do, It used to be, I'm at Crucible for the very first time. They don't think that way, and you see the standard that they play at when they get to the Crucible is brilliant. And the standard, the top 64 in the world, is unbelievable how many of them are playing to a very high standard. And that's why the game is very, very healthy at the moment. And any tournament you watch, there's so many different people can win. But I remember years ago, people were saying, you got to be in your 20s to win a ranking event. And I used to have a go at the press. I'd say, what are you talking about in the 20s? You don't learn enough. I mean, Ray Reid and John Spencer were at their peak in their early 40s. And they used to laugh at this sort of thing. Now look at the winners. Look at your John Higgins, your Mark Williams, your Ronnie O'Sullivans. They're 48 years of age. Okay, they're exceptional, but it's not always a young man's game. You can still carry on winning into your 40s, and as I say, Ronnie might carry on winning world championships in his 50s. So overall, the game is in great shape. You've got the youngsters coming through, and you've got the established players, and that's the other thing. You can't beat seeing an up-and-coming player playing against one of the top players to see how they can cope with him.
I would personally like to thank you. Hard to believe that almost 40 years ago I sat and watched the TV screen, and I'm able to sit here, call you a good friend, somebody who's a role model for 19 million plus people out there. You're an amazing ambassador for the game. You have shown resilience. You have worked hard. You deserve everything that you ever have achieved in life. And at 75, you're still out there enjoying yourself, working hard, being a role model. And I think that there's so many people out there will agree exactly what I have to say. Thank you for coming here today. It's been a pleasure, and I'm just honoured.
Well, listen, Sean, we've known each other for quite a few years, and you know, it's great to come back and be able to do this with you, sit and chat with you, and see how you've gone from sort of retiring from snooker at a very young age, and to see how successful you've become. So, great pleasure to sit here in this wonderful city of Liverpool. My wife Louise is from Liverpool, so it means a lot to me. So thank you very much, and I enjoyed the chat tremendously.